That question wasn't spoken aloud. It simply settled. In Captain Elias Ward's mind, in the stale air of the hangar, in the uneasy silence between men who had seen too much of war and not enough of reason. The hangar doors slid open with a grinding groan, and every pilot present instinctively fell silent. There it was. The captured Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber sat at the center of the room like a massive dead insect, sleek, green, wounded, and hauntingly intact. The Pacific sun bled through the high windows, catching the jagged metal wounds across its skin. Elias stepped forward slowly, the heavy rubber soles of his boots echoing. He'd spent the last 2 years fighting planes just like this. He could identify one in the dark. He could hear one from miles away. He could smell the fuel before seeing the fuselage. But this one felt different. "Hard to believe she was dropping hellfire on our boys a week ago," murmured Lieutenant Sam Doyle, Elias's closest friend since training days. Elias didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the bomber's wings. Damaged, yes, but not burned. Why not burned? The crew chief waved them closer. "Take a good look, gentlemen. You won't believe what we found." Elias leaned in, bracing himself, but nothing prepared him for what he saw. The Betty's fuel tanks, 2 massive drums snug behind the wings, were exposed like organs without ribs. No armor, no plating, no reinforcement. Just thin metal skins, easily punctured, easily ignited. Sam crouched underneath the left wing, tapping gently at the tank with a wrench. The hollow clink sounded weak, vulnerable. "Jesus," Sam whispered. "One tracer, one spark. This thing should have lit up like a 4th of July firework." Elias traced the thin metal with 2 fingers. It was cold, too cold. "Why would they build a bomber like this?" he muttered. "It's suicide." Mechanics had already counted more than 60 bullet holes piercing the fuselage, many astonishingly close to the tanks. Yet the bomber had flown miles before its forced landing. It shouldn't have survived. But it did. And now Elias felt something he rarely felt around enemy machines. Confusion. Almost dread. They were preparing to leave when the hangar fell strangely quiet. Soldiers straightened. A few exchanged uneasy glances. A small, elderly Japanese man, thin as a reed, yet strangely dignified, walked inside under armed escort. His hands were bound, but his steps were steady. "That's Dr. Kenji Sato," whispered the intelligence officer beside Elias. "Aircraft engineer, captured 2 days ago during the raid." Elias glanced sharply at him. The man wasn't trembling. He wasn't confused. He looked heartbroken. Kenji's gaze locked onto the Betty bomber, and for one moment, just one, he seemed to forget the soldiers, the ropes around his wrists, the war. His lips parted in a breath that sounded like pain. "He asked to see the plane," the officer added. Elias stepped forward. "You helped design this?" he asked. Kenji lifted his head. His voice was soft, accented, but steady. "I tried," he said quietly. "I tried to stop it." Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. After the others drifted away, Elias found himself lingering. Something about Kenji pulled at him. Not sympathy exactly, but curiosity mixed with unease. Kenji stood beside the bomber, his bound hands brushing the fuselage as if touching an injured child. "You wonder," Kenji murmured without looking up, "why no armor on fuel tanks?" Elias hesitated. "It seems irrational, dangerous. Why risk your own crews?" Kenji closed his eyes briefly. "It was not our choice. It was command." He explained that Japan's dwindling aluminum supplies had forced brutal decisions, decisions he fought against but ultimately lost. Range was prioritized above survival. They wanted a bomber that could fly far, Kenji said. Too far, beyond what the alloy could safely support if armored. Elias frowned. At the cost of how many crewmen? Kenji's shoulders tensed, his voice cracked. Too many. Far too many. His grief felt honest, too honest for Elias to dismiss. Kenji reached into his coat pocket. The guards tensed, but he only removed a folded, worn photograph. He handled it with the gentleness of a man holding his own soul. He handed it to Elias. A young Japanese pilot smiled awkwardly at the camera, his uniform slightly oversized, his hair tousled by the wind. My son, Kenji said. First mission last year. Never returned. Elias stared at the picture. A lump formed in his throat. You designed the plane he died in? He whispered. Kenji's eyes glistened. I designed what I hoped would save him. Instead, I built what killed him. He took a shaky breath. War takes a piece of us long before it kills us. Elias didn't know what to say. For the first time in the war, he saw not an enemy engineer, but a father. Later, Sam caught Elias outside the hangar. You're spending too much time with him, Sam hissed. He's the enemy, Eli. Don't forget that. He's a man who lost his son, Elias countered. Sam's jaw tightened. And what? That wipes away the blood on his hands? Elias wanted to argue, but Sam's pain was deeper than anger. It was personal. Sam's older brother, a pilot, had died in a Betty bomber raid. That man designed the bombers that killed Pete, Sam snapped. Don't expect me to shake his hand. He walked away, leaving Elias torn. Two men, both grieving sons, one dead, one enemy. Why did war need both? Days later, during a deeper inspection, a mechanic yelled from inside the bomber. Captain, you're gonna want to see this. Elias climbed in. The cramped interior smelled of fuel and dust. Bullet holes let in thin shafts of light like tiny spotlights. Behind a removable panel, hidden behind wires and insulation, was a tiny compartment, perfectly concealed. Inside were papers, notebooks, small diagrams, technical sketches, and handwritten notes. Sam grabbed one page and frowned. Engine cooling improvements. Emergency flight maneuvers. What the hell is this? Kenji, escorted nearby, stepped forward. His eyes widened, not in fear but recognition. They found them, he whispered. Elias studied him. Found what? Kenji swallowed. My secret. In a tense meeting room, Kenji sat across from Elias, Sam, and several intelligence officers. His hands were no longer bound, though guards still watched from the corners. Kenji explained. I wrote survival instructions for Betty crews. I hid them in planes, one by one. Soldiers were not supposed to have them. Command forbade it. The officers exchanged surprised glances. Kenji continued, voice trembling. They knew the fuel tanks would ignite easily. They knew a single bullet would kill entire crews. He took a shaky breath. I could not save the design, but maybe I could save the boys forced to fly them. Elias felt something shift in his chest. This man had risked execution to save lives. Enemy lives, yes, but human lives all the same. Sam looked away, jaw clenched. Sam slammed his hands on the table. So you saved their boys, he barked, but not ours. Sam, Elias began. No, Eli, Sam snapped. This man smuggled safety tips to enemy pilots and now he wants credit. Kenji bowed his head. I never wished harm on American pilots, he said softly. I wished only to lessen the deaths of my own. You want pity? Sam growled. My brother died because planes like yours existed. Kenji closed his eyes. I am sorry, truly. If I could rewrite what happened, I would. But Sam stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Elias watched him leave, torn between friendship and truth. The next morning, Elias found Kenji sketching quietly on a notepad. Despite everything, despite the outbursts and interrogations, the old engineer's hand was steady. You're still working, Elias said gently. Kenji nodded. I know what you are wondering, Captain. He tapped the fuel tank diagram. You wonder how American pilots survived encounters with Betty bombers more often than expected. Elias raised an eyebrow. I do. Kenji exhaled slowly. I taught Japanese crews to dump fuel rapidly before impact. If they were hit, less fuel meant fewer explosions. Elias blinked. So, you secretly showed them how to avoid becoming flying fireballs. Yes, Kenji murmured, even when command forbade it. He looked up, eyes tired but resolute. If I cannot stop the war, Captain, at least I can stop the fire. Elias felt something warm, respect perhaps, bloom inside him. The room was thick with tension as senior officers gathered around Kenji's sketches. Maps, diagrams, and half-erased equations filled the table like scattered confessions. The colonel lifted one of the papers, brow furrowing. You're suggesting we redesign our emergency fuel dump systems based on the Betty's flaws? Kenji bowed his head respectfully but firmly. I am suggesting you protect your pilots better than we protected ours. The colonel scowled. Why trust an enemy engineer? Elias stepped forward before he could stop himself. Because he knows what kills pilots, sir, better than we do. He lived inside that weakness for years. Kenji added quietly. And because I learned too late what happens when command ignores engineers. Silence. Then, surprisingly, the colonel exhaled and dropped the papers onto the table. Fine. We test the modifications. Ward, Doyle, you'll oversee the pilot side implementation. Elias nodded. Sam stiffened but said nothing. Kenji looked relieved, but more than that, he looked determined, as if this chance meant something far larger than survival. For days, the hangar became a workshop of clashing cultures and surprising cooperation. Kenji moved from station to station, explaining designs with precise gestures, sketching diagrams on scrap metal, correcting wiring angles with soft-spoken patience. American mechanics, skeptical at first, grew to respect him. He's got golden hands, one muttered. Can see airflow like a magician. Kenji simply smiled. Sam, however, watched from a distance. His expression was conflicted, anger warring with something quieter, something Elias hoped was the beginning of understanding. One evening, Sam approached Elias. He doesn't act like I expected, Sam admitted reluctantly. No, Elias said softly. He's not the man who killed your brother. Sam clenched his jaw. I know that, but knowing it doesn't make the anger stop. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. Anger doesn't always mean truth, Sam. Sometimes it means you're still hurting. Sam didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. Late one night, Sam returned to the captured bomber alone. Elias found him sitting inside, staring at a small piece of paper in his hands. What's that? Elias asked. Sam passed it over. It was a sketch, a simple pencil drawing of Kenji's son, folded and refolded until the creases nearly tore it apart. Found it tucked behind the navigator's seat, Sam murmured. He must have put it there for luck. Sam rubbed his forehead. My brother had a drawing too. A doodle I made for him when we were kids. He kept it on his flights. His voice cracked. Elias sat beside him, letting the silence breathe. Sam's knuckles whitened. Kenji isn't the enemy anymore, is he? Elias shook his head gently. No, he's just a father who lost more than he ever deserved. Sam swallowed hard, and something inside him softened, like a wound finally beginning to close. The day of the test flight arrived with a heavy Pacific heat that made the air shimmer. Mechanics triple-checked the redesigned fuel systems. Kenji stood by the aircraft, fingers clasped tightly, eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Captain Ward, he said softly as Elias approached, You do not have to be the one to test it." Elias smiled. "If I don't trust your work, how can I expect anyone else to?" Sam stepped forward unexpectedly. "If he's going, I'm going too." Kenji bowed, deeply, gratefully. The flight began smoothly. Then, at high altitude, a deliberate rupture simulation triggered a fuel line breach. Flames licked the left wing. Elias's heart slammed. Sam yelled, "Fuel dump, now!" Kenji's redesigned system activated. Fuel burst outward in a controlled spray, starved the flame, and the fire died almost instantly. The plane shuddered but held steady. They landed safely. Kenji rushed toward the cockpit as Elias climbed out. Tears streamed down the old man's face. "You lived," he whispered. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved me." For the first time since his capture, Kenji allowed himself to breathe freely. That evening, Kenji approached Elias with a sealed envelope, aged, yellowed, and covered in careful Japanese handwriting. "My last letter to my son," he said quietly. "I wrote it the night before his final flight. I never got to give it to him." Elias hesitated. "Kenji, I'm not sure I should." "I want you to read it," Kenji insisted. "Someone should hear what I never said aloud." Later, alone in his quarters, Elias opened the letter. It was a confession of fear, of pride, of regret. It was a father apologizing for a war he couldn't stop, for a plane he was forced to build, for a world that demanded sons die to prove points old men argued over. Elias felt a tear slip down his cheek. The weight of the letter was unbearable, and yet unbearably human. Kenji had not been trying to survive the war. He had been trying to survive his own heart. The next morning, Sam stood at the edge of the hangar, staring at Kenji with an expression Elias couldn't read. Finally, he walked forward. "Dr. Sato," he said stiffly, "there's something I need to say." Kenji turned, surprised. Sam swallowed. "My brother died in a Betty attack. For a long time, I blamed you. I blamed your hands, your designs, your existence." Kenji bowed deeply. "I understand." "No," Sam said quietly, "you don't. Because now, I don't blame you anymore." Kenji blinked, visibly shaken. "I was angry at the war," Sam continued. "But the war doesn't have a face. You did. And I took everything out on you. I'm sorry." Kenji's eyes shone with gratitude and sorrow. "Your brother," he said softly, "deserved to come home, as did my son. I wish I could have saved them both." Sam nodded. "I believe you." And that, Elias realized, was the true beginning of peace. In the following weeks, Kenji worked seamlessly with American engineers, not because he was forced, but because he wanted to. His designs saved fuel, saved lives, saved men on missions they once feared would be their last. But it wasn't all work. Evenings became storytelling time. Kenji shared gentle tales of his son, how he used to chase dragonflies, how he wanted to be a commercial pilot, how he practiced phrases in English so he could someday fly tourists over cherry blossom fields. Sam shared stories about his brother Pete, how he played harmonica off-key, how he taught Sam to skip rocks, how he dreamt of becoming a flight instructor after the war. Elias often listened quietly, observing the strange miracle unfolding. Two men who should have hated each other were healing each other. War had broken them, but shared humanity was stitching them back together. One morning brought news that rippled through the base. Japan had signaled willingness to negotiate surrender. The war was ending. Kenji asked for one final request. He wanted to visit the Betty bomber alone. The guards allowed it. Elias followed quietly at a distance. Inside the bomber, Kenji placed his hand on the fuselage where, years earlier, Japanese engineers had painted his son's unit insignia. The paint was faded now, chipped, a ghost of what once was. "I built machines to fight a war I never wanted," Kenji whispered. "But they took my son before I understood what I had become." He traced the bullet holes gently. "Still, I leave here having saved American pilots, men who were supposed to be my enemies." He closed his eyes. "That is enough for my heart." Elias stepped forward then, placing a hand on Kenji's back. No words were needed. Two men stood inside a bomber built for destruction and found something like forgiveness. A week later, orders arrived to transfer Kenji to a civilian processing camp. The mechanics gathered to shake his hand. Engineers thanked him. Pilots saluted him. Sam approached last. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pin, his brother's flight wings. Kenji gasped softly. "I want you to have this," Sam said. "Pete always said every pilot deserves a chance to come home. You tried to give that chance to sons who weren't your own." Kenji's hands trembled as he accepted the pin. "For peace," Sam said. "For peace," Kenji echoed. There were no enemies left in that moment. Only men who had survived something terrible together. Years later, Elias stood in a museum dedicated to the Pacific War. Among the displays was a restored Betty bomber, the very same one they had inspected. A plaque read, "This aircraft's vulnerability led to innovations in global fuel safety systems, saving thousands of pilots in the decades that followed." But Elias knew that wasn't the real story. The real story wasn't about engineering flaws or fuel tanks. It was about a father who lost his son and chose to save the sons of strangers. It was about Sam learning that forgiveness doesn't erase grief, but it can give it meaning. It was about humanity surviving even in war. Elias reached into his coat and placed a framed copy of Kenji's drawing, his son's portrait, next to the display. A museum guide approached. "Sir, did you know the engineer who helped develop those safety systems?" Elias smiled gently. "Yes," he said. "He taught me that even in war, compassion is a weapon far stronger than fire." He stepped back, letting the light fall over the bomber, the portrait, and the plaque. And somewhere deep in his memory, he could almost hear Kenji's voice. Machines should carry people to the ones they love, not take them away.